nasty old Jaffrey, our villain. They don't get much meaner and nastier than Jaffrey. His nasty little smile. Notice what the narrator says about his smile. This is good stuff. There's a thin veneer of pleasantness about him. In some ways, do you know this? In some ways, he's kind of this grown-up version of the little boy that in the shop that visits Hepzibah. This grasping, selfish, nasty little fellow. The word nasty just comes to mind. If there's any other character that's even remotely like him, it's probably Uriah Heep, a character from one of Dickens's novels, who shakes your hand and smiles. He's this obsequious, but it's so phony that you can tell. You know, once you pull back your hand after you've shaken his hand, you just kind of want to wipe it on your sweatshirt or something. Get the nasty, filmy grossness off of you that this guy seems to exude. He has the old judge's traits throughout ingrained in him. Old Colonel Pynchon's traits are ingrained in him thoroughly. There's something else he shares with his ancestor, as you find out later in the romance. So that's kind of an interesting thing, kind of ties in with this theme that we're going to talk about a little bit later on. Some of the other characters that figure prominently, especially as we go back in time, Matthew Mall, our young necromancer who mesmerizes Alice Pynchon and has casts a spell on her because of the old man Pynchon and his greed and how he sort of takes back. All this goes back to the Salem witch trials and the accusations. It's wonderful stuff in many respects. That Colonel Pynchon, he of the family illness, the greedy old goat, whose portrait we see over and over again. And we find out that that land up there in Maine, the elusive claim on it will never be exploited, even as Jaffrey seeks to go find it, and the unrealized dream of the family of great wealth and power fizzles before them, and it does so because, you know, you just don't want to mess with a Maul. That's the issue right there. So old man Maul, who's executed and who tells Colonel Pynchon that he will have blood to drink. Well, he literally does, doesn't he? Good stuff, that, and ties it into the Gothic tradition, as we'll talk about in a moment as well. Little Alice, Matthew and Alice, kind of an ancient or earlier or older version of Holgrave and Phoebe, of course. If you didn't catch that, well then you need to have another cup of coffee as you read this kind of thing. So that's replaying itself, Colonel Pynchon and Jaffrey and all these kind. But this time, history's not going to repeat itself. It's going to be different. Matthew Mall and Alice could have had something, didn't. Matthew didn't hold back. Matthew did something he really shouldn't have. He mesmerized Alice. He allowed his darker nature to overcome his better attributes. But Holgrave won't. Holgrave will make a real, live, warm connection with Phoebe, and that will end quite differently there. Uncle Venner, another kind of minor figure, but he keeps coming up. This one's an idealized figure. I get it. It's, you know, he's a little bit too good, the penniless philosopher of the town, but he has something nice to say and good advice to give wherever he goes and whatever he does. He's a little bit of a sort of Diogenes figure, telling the truth no matter how rustic it may be. But by the way, don't forget the narrator in this. The narrator certainly figures prominently. He's not a character, I know that, but at the same time, the narrator is filled with commentary all over the place. Now, this narrator guy in this novel is a really slippery fellow. In one sentence, he builds us up to believe that there actually are ghosts in the room. In the next, he says, but of course, there are no such thing as ghosts. Well, hey, what gives, slippery guy? First you say there are ghosts, then you say, well, there are no ghosts. So I think Nathaniel Hawthorne wants us to constantly to wonder about the state of affairs in this work. Remember, this is a romance. It's not a novel. And by his definition, it's supposed to walk a tightrope between fantasy and reality. It's not all fantasy. It's not all reality. He wants to get to this notion that, hey, you never know. He wants to walk in that sort of twilight area there of the possible, and he wants to talk about or emphasize the strength of the possible. part of our brain says no such thing as ghosts. Other part of our brain says, well, you never know. He doesn't want us to be total skeptics. He doesn't want us to be totally detached from reality either. He wants to tread that in-between ground where he says that's the fertile area of lots of great art. When we let our imagination play, but we don't let our imagination run away with us. This narrator comments, judges, doubts, and convinces as well. Take a look at that passage. I wish we had time in this to read all these wonderful passages here. Maybe we'll put that in the discussion area, see who's got their favorite passages and comments on those. Look at that wonderful passage where he seems to take particular delight in the death of Judge Jaffrey. He even taunts him as the fly lands on his forehead. Hey, what's the matter, Judge? Huh? Cat got your tongue? Well, why don't you get up? Come on, buddy. There's a lot of stuff to be done. Isn't there a meeting you're supposed to go to tonight? Oh, wow, the fly that landed on your forehead certainly seems to be... Aren't you going to swat the fly? This is just almost this wicked delight in the downfall of the judge. Is the narrator Hawthorne? Is Hawthorne the narrator? No, I don't think you can make that exact connection there. The narrator is the narrator. But it's hard to believe that Hawthorne, having set up this terrible villain of Judge Jaffrey, isn't taking at least some vicarious joy in seeing his own character bite the dust as he does. So some wonderful characters in here. Identify your favorite passages, especially the thing as the owls run away. These two helpless, vulnerable people at the mercy of Judge Jaffrey, but then he gets his own in the end. The way Hawthorne sets up the characters, establishes the characters, not terribly detailed, like I said, with the physical characteristics, but we certainly have a feel for who these are personality-wise. They're quite different from one another, especially in contrasting their different temperaments. That's really what he wants to get at as this thing goes on.